what black point compensation does is, let's say I have a paper that starts registering detail in my shadows at an L star count of 16. I have a paper that does that, which would probably be something like a matte paper. All right, and I'm making up a number, but it'll be high. The file itself has detail in an L star count of 3. That means that I have 13 steps of detail that would be lost if I do not have black point compensation. By clicking on black point compensation, what it says is, oh, all this data here starts now at 16. So it takes all the data and moves it up to where the black point is. So you always want to use black point compensation. Ansel Adams said the negative is everything, the print is all. The negative is the sheet music, the print is a symphony. Everything you do in post-processing is about the print. Everything. And as I discussed in the previous class, where do you make all your decisions when you about your picture? Where?
Point of capture.
Point of capture. Okay? And the more you know about the middle, how you manipulate the image, the more informed your decisions can be where? At point of capture, right? And everything you do is in service of what? The print. Here's the disconnect. What's the print in service of? Your voice, which happens where? At point of capture. It's this print. It's this that is the best of you. It's this that will survive you, and this is what took you. And this is the thing that you show, this is the thing that you present, this is the thing that you sell, this is the thing that when people look at, they see the best of your spirit. That's what they see. When you are on the other side of the grass, this won't be. This is what's left of you. That's my attitude towards it. And so what I try to do is I want the best possible print. Okay, that translates to a bunch of other things. So how much time should you spend working on the file? Should it be, I don't got any time, I want to out of there? Or should you take the amount of time that's needed to produce the best possible file to make the best possible print? How much bigger that is? See that? Okay, here is why in your image editing workflow you want to work in 16-bit Pro Photo, but not print necessarily in Pro Photo, but Adobe RGB. I'll load in a file and a paper profile in a second to show you this. You see how big Pro Photo is? Okay, it's a 16-bit color space. If you work in Pro Photo, you must work in 16-bit. First off. Second, all of the artifacting that will occur in the image manipulation process will occur outside of what Adobe RGB can print. Why? Because it is so huge of a color space. This is another one of these very few pieces of dogma that I have in art. All artifacting is cumulative and may be multiplicative. I have one of my students here that I just pounded that into his head, okay? And the goal is to negate multiplication artifacting and to minimize accumulation artifacting. What are those two things? 2 plus 2 is 4, right? That's accumulation. 2 plus 2 times 2 is multiplication. So 2 plus 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. All right? So what happens is if you start doing things on the same file on the same layer, you run the risk of introducing multiplication artifacting. You want to negate that. That is why I have in my workflow more layers, which you can attest to, than any human being should be allowed to have, because it negates multiplication. The way that I treat a raw file, for example, is I'm an advocate of processing the raw file in the camera manufacturer's software, saving it to a TIFF, and then going to Lightroom or going to Photoshop, but do it there. Why? Raw files are pie crust. How many bakers do I have in here? How much do you handle pie crust?
Little as possible.
Little as possible. because the more you handle it, the tougher it becomes. Because multiplication artifacting is what the issue is. If all artifacting is cumulative and maybe multiplicative, the last thing I want to do is bake into my raw file multiplication artifacting. So if you use Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom as your raw processor, do as few things to it at that level as possible. Move on to a software that is more powerful to handle those things. Because part of the problem is that a lot of the stuff that you can do in a raw processor is better served done later on in the workflow. Okay? Bumping saturation, increasing contrast. Those things are better handled further on aesthetically than at the very beginning. Because if you bake into your file contrast and then sharpness, what is unsharp mask? The introduction of contrast to the edges of pixels. So I've added contrast to the pixels. And then to the same layer, I apply onto that contrast. What am I going to do to the contrast that I've added to pixels? Halo. Okay, 2 plus 2 times 2. If I have a layer of contrast above and not amplifying it, I just get cumulation. I don't get multiplication. That's an observation that I have made in my own work, that if I do it this way, I can negate or minimize multiplication out of existence. That's the goal. This is the signature of the paper. So the lighter image is Adobe RGB, okay? And the printer and paper is capable of printing outside, see this big bulb over here, greater than Adobe RGB can contain in the oranges to yellows and the blues. So the problem with this then becomes one of in the blue-greens. I can't see it. I can print it, but I can't see it. I can manipulate it, but I can't see it. So it can cause issues with skin tone. If you're dealing with skin tones from Southeast Asia, it will tend to make them more yellow than they actually are. If you're dealing with nature, you'll tend to get colors that don't necessarily exist. So what should you do? Because if I kick in ProPhoto, as far as ProPhoto is concerned, that profile in that paper that's bigger than Adobe RGB is still an hors d'oeuvre. It can easily eat that color, the profile. So unless I want to do that, unless I want fantasy color, unless I'm willing to accept that I may have a difference in what I've printed before to what I'm printing now, it is better, in my opinion, to print out of Adobe RGB. It is better to manipulate the image in ProPhoto. It is better to do all the tweaking you're going to do in ProPhoto, but you punch out a file in Adobe RGB and you print from that. What I do is I break my workflow up into segments. So let's say I have 6 images that I want to put together into one image. Do I need to carry the headroom of all 6 images, or do I need the outcome? So I label that parts. Then I do aesthetic stuff to it. And that's going to be 20 layers, let's say. Do I need all 20 layers, or do I just need the outcome? I'm going to make a black and white conversion. That black and white conversion is going to be 6 layers. Do I need all 20 layers plus the other layers, or do I just need the outcome? So that's what I do, is I break it up. Yes, I can go back to the individual steps, and yes, I can go all the way back up. I just don't need to move a 12 gig potential file. I can move it in smaller amounts, which is what I would suggest you consider in your workflow. With regards to image editing workflow, which is again what you feed the file or the printer, it is best to be sloppy. And what I mean by that, it's okay to have the file in more than one place. Your raw file can be there, your raw file can be in the folder that the original raw files are in, because it's not a case of if the hard drive is going to fail, it's a case of when the hard drive is going to fail, so you want to have backup. What's important with regard to printing, and actually more so in black and white than it is in color, is to calibrate your monitor. When I hosted the Epson Print Academy, after I said, hello, welcome to the Epson Print Academy, my name's Vincent Versace, The next thing that I was asked to say out of my mouth was, before you do anything, before you buy another camera and another printer, if you do not have monitor calibration, calibrate your monitor. The single greatest impact that you can have on your prints is to calibrate your monitor. Why? Because you don't know what you're seeing. We know, I see a red, but I don't know which red it is. I just know that it is a red. So the first step in this process is to calibrate your monitor with regards to printing, because why? This is a default device. Only as good as what I see. What color when you're walking down the street at night and somebody's watching television, what color is the light coming out of the house? Bluish. Okay. So the monitor is inherently bluish. That means that when I correct it, I'm going to add the appropriate amount of magenta to negate the inappropriate amount of blue, so that when I have the monitor, right, it looks right on my monitor if it's not calibrated. When I print it, it's going to print what? Magenta, to which I blame the printer. This is known as the inverse square root law of technological blame. That which is the printer's fault, I blame myself. That which is my fault, I blame the printer. Also, you don't walk around doing this. You like this picture? Here, keep the camera. No, anytime you want to look at it, just hit this button. Or you don't walk around with a monitor going, huh? Huh? What you do, it's the print, right? So if this is not calibrated to that, I'm going to print magenta and I'm going to say, printer sucks. What you're printing is the correction curve for the monitor. What you're not printing is what it is that you want. You're only printing what it is that you see, not based on what it is that you've calibrated. Very, very important. How many people are really into black and white in this? Okay, this is the printer for black and white. And again, if it matters anywhere, it matters most with regards to black and white. I'll show you that as well. When you're capturing a raw file, you're coming up with a linearized black and white file. So you have red, green, red, green, red, green, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, red, green, red, green, red, green. And that particular order is based off of human vision. We tend to see more in the greenish yellow better than we do any of the other colors. We see green best, red second best, and blue least. From here to there is what a CCD is capable of seeing. There is a filter placed in front of the CCD that limits from here to there. Okay, so you have a file that contains more color in it than you actually mix. Adobe RGB is smaller than ProPhoto. You can get ProPhoto out of a raw file. So all you're doing is you're saying mix the color to a bigger space. Okay? Gotcha. Because this is the approximate limit. Why you set it to Adobe RGB is so that you can get the maximum amount of information to make the best decision on the back of the camera for something called exposed to the right, ETTR. And what ETTR states is that 2/3 of the file's information exists in the first stop of exposure. So a slightly hot image can sometimes be to your advantage because there's more information there than you have. The best explanations of this are Michael Reichman's Luminous Landscape and Jeff Shiwi wrote two really, really, really extraordinary descriptions of this. Now, it matters a little bit more on the Canon side of the fence than it does on the Nikon side of the fence because of the metering systems. But the principle still holds the same. The proof that I came up with this was I overexposed a D800 file that's normally 48 megabytes raw. I could get it to 52 megabytes. What does that mean I have? More data of the same exposure. Now, do I recommend overexposing everything? Certainly not. I recommend letting the camera do most of the heavy lifting, but if you're doing a landscape, it's okay to cook off one a little hot because you may wind up with some information you need. I'm going to use Photoshop 2014 instead of 2015. This particular technique is one that I developed on how to get an out-of-focus photograph in focus. And unfortunately, I apologize, I'm going to have to do this at full resolution. All right. We would agree, not in focus, right? Here's why. This is a waterfall. See that? And to get smoky water, I have to do what? Long exposure, which means the water is moving and it's producing mist. Now the water is hotter or colder than the air around it? Colder. So now I have a micro environment and I have air full of particulate matter blurring the entire image. I am sitting across the street or across the river rather, on black asphalt with a van blocking the wind, with my Enduro tripod, with a weight pulling it down, with my Arca Swiss mount, with my L grip, with my, at the time, D700 camera, with a 24 to 70 nano coated lens. I got sharp, I got file size, I've got stability, and what do I have? Blur. Okay? Now, here's an important thing about this, and then I'll get to this technique really quick. Blurrier objects are bigger than in-focus objects. So if I want to create a blur edge, will be bigger than an in-focus edge. Okay? So if I tighten all the edges, I should do what? Give you the illusion of it's in focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sharpen this image, I think 6 times on 6 different layers. And then what I will do is I will take all of the sharpening that I've done and apply it to one layer. So you can see the difference. Fair enough? I apologize. You know what? I think I can do this on the smaller resolution one and it'll go faster but give you the same effect. This effect is called the Lazarus effect, raising the dead pixel. I'll wait for it. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a folder, save it here, call it test, create it, boom. Now, you see all this little stuff here? All that looks like pepper? That's noise. The problem with noise is that signal noise, and image structure occupy the same space, which is a pixel. So we're taught to do what? Noise reduction first and sharpening last, right? So explain to me why you would blur an image, because that's what noise reduction is, to apply sharpening after. Doesn't make sense, does it? Do sharpening first and noise reduction last. Because image structure and image noise occupy the same space, and we don't know which is what. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to just up to the point where it's slightly crispy. Again, you see how this is noise? Let's back this down to where we're not experiencing noise. Click OK. This is called He-Man sharpening, and how you sharpen doing He-Man sharpening is you find the radius that you want to work in first and then back the intensity down. Okay? All right. I lowered the file size down to make it go faster. But this is considerably sharper than that. Okay? See that? Versus that. Now, let's look at accumulation artifacting, which will be this is accumulation artifacting. Come on. That's accumulation artifact or multiplication artifacting. That's applying all the different sharpenings to the same layer. Is that something you want? No. That's why I separate things out into separate layers so that I get accumulation, not multiplication. This is one of the biggest problems in printing, which is sharpening aesthetic and sharpening for print. Here's the rule of thumb. If it looks right on the screen, for sharpening, it tends to be a little soft. If it's a little bit over sharpened on the screen, it tends to be about right for printing. Why? Because you're dealing with multiple resolutions. I have a 360, which is the magic number for an Epson printer, 360 output. The next one is 270, not 240. Okay, it works in multiples of 90. The printer head works in multiples of 90. So 180, 270, 360. Okay? That's how the Epson printer head wants to see files. The best result will be from 360 DPI or PPI. This is a 2880 DPI printer working on a 360 PPI file in which you're looking at it at a 72 PPI screen. So you have pixels and dots, and you have 3 different resolutions. The first thing in your printing process is to calibrate your monitor because it matters, and it matters most with regards to black and white. Now, here's another little secret, and it's an interesting thing. A color printer that can print black and white well is a better color printer than a color printer that can't print black and white because of this. Why this is a gangbusters printer is because of how well it prints color. Because what dictates the density of the colors is the quality and the way in which it handles the neutrals. So if it can handle neutrals and produce a neutral print and is very, very well behaved and very, very predictable, what can you guarantee? Predictable color. Okay, consistency. He or she who controls color in their image wins. It is the ownership and control of color that matters, which is why calibrating your monitor matters. I use a I1 display in the field and then the whole enchilada at the studio. But I travel with a calibrator. The reason why I travel with a calibrator to calibrate my monitor and calibrate the projector is because it matters. What I use Lightroom for is I have to produce contact sheets, get them out. If I have to do mass things, that's what it's good for my workflow. I'm a fine art workflow or a very, very targeted photojournalist or commercial art workflow. So for me, I live in a slightly different cosmic reality. So it's a great piece of software with a wonderful UI and does a lot of really cool things. I don't shoot into it. It works for that, it does a nice job. Well, I'm dyed-in-the-wool Photoshop guy. I think Photoshop's probably the most inspired piece of software ever written, and am willing to say from the highest treetops, if it wasn't for that software, I would not be as good of a photographer as I am today. it opened up my creativity in a way in which, you know, I would be years behind. So I look at all the software, and what I find to be the case, if you're doing a fine art or targeted image specific or several images, not big, huge amounts of work, Photoshop's the best tool. It's the best tool for me. It's a great tool for a lot of things, and actually what I think it has done is it has brought up the level of the quality of photography for people that were always frustrated by not having the right picture. The defaults really work. The problem with defaults is the fault of them is that that's good enough. No, good enough is not good enough. Default's a place to start. And that's my, you know, standing on a soapbox kind of thing. But you have to pick the right tool for what you do. For me, Photoshop is the right tool. I do a lot of in the field shooting. My camera chit-chats to the computer through wireless. I'm working on a 7200 camera right now. I gave myself a self-assignment, which I invite you all to consider, and then I'll get back to this printing thing, which is pick a location, pick a thing and do that. Like one of them is I don't cross the street, and I take pictures of the area, and I see how many different pictures I can photograph not crossing the street. For me, what I wanted to do was one camera, one lens, and I picked the 7200 and this camera, and from Labor Day to Photo Plus East, all I am shooting with on all my jobs and everything I do is this combo. 28 to 300. And the reason why I picked this camera is because if I give myself assignment that, I can't use the 400mm lens that I like to use to go sneak into, you know, 5 miles away and be at the dining room table with everybody. So now, because of the 1.5 crop factor, I get the effective zoom. That's why I did that, and it's a great little camera. First thing you want to do when you set up Photoshop, go to Preferences. Let's start with General. Color Picker, Adobe. Hue Wheel Large. Why I use the Hue Wheel Large, I turn off Auto Update Open Documents. Do not show welcome screen at launch. Beep when done. Don't need all of those. All the rest of this, yes. Interface. Now Photoshop defaults to this, which is to make it look more like Lightroom. Now, I set it to this, and I'd recommend that you set your background to gray on your desktop, but I set it to this because this has to do with color management. I'm making decisions about color, correct? Which means that I want to make decisions based off of gray, not of black. Let me open up an image and I'll show you why I do this. Let's pop this image open. Let's get out of here for a second. Okay. That's against neutral gray. Watch what happens to this image when I go to black. What happened to the color? What happened to the contrast? Okay, everything popped. So what I'm doing, if I introduce artificial contrast to the image, is I am affecting the print because I may have more contrast and more saturation than I want. Photoshop becomes the camera operating system. Lightroom becomes the camera's operating system conceptually, in that there's no difference. So we're here in interface. That's the gray that I pick. Standard mode default, drop shadow. Why? I like drop shadows, they're pretty. Medium gray for the background. Full screen black, nothing. This allows me to see if there's any flaws in the image easier, like dust on the sensor, stuff like that. What's going on in the image, and if I need to present it, it gives me something that is easy to present. UI font size large, I think we've established why, because I'm blind as a bat without my glasses. Show channels in color, yes, if that's what you use. Dynamic color sliders, show menu colors, enable text drop shadows. Those are all on. Workspace. Auto collapsing iconic panels I turn off. Open documents as tabs I turn off, and enable floating document window docking I turn off. The reason why I do this is I do multiple images, and if they're tabs, it's hard to manipulate them, so it's very hard for me to work with. Auto-collapsing iconic panels and enable floating document window docking, that's the... And when you're working on a laptop, it's about acreage, and I don't need anything colliding with it, and it becomes more work, so I don't do that. This is your preference, enable narrow option bar. Tools, show tool tips. I turn gestures off when I'm working on a laptop, because if I rest my fingers on my trackpad and I move one finger, I've now rotated my image. So I'm not very adept at it, so I turn that off. Use shift keys for tool switch. I do. Over scroll, I turn off. Enable flick panning. I don't understand. Flick panning is when you pan, it does this. It's beautiful. I don't use it. Zoom with scroll wheel. I don't have a scroll wheel. Animated zoom. I also turn that off on my iPhone. Zoom resizes windows, yes. Zoom click to point center. Again, that depends on your workflow. Varying round brush hardness based on HUD vertical movement is a cool little tool. And show transform values top right, yep. History log. History log is a really cool thing if you're building a client or you're writing a book. But what you have to remember to do is to take the history log out of the place where it's stored and put it someplace else, because it overwrites it. What the history log does is it logs everything that you're going to do and tells you what it is you did. Sync settings, file handling, save to original folder, yes, yes, yes. And transparency units, grid size medium, grid color light, gray. Why? We've discussed this because it's a color management issue. Units and rulers. This is very, very, very important. Rulers, inches, type points, and this is where you set your new document resolution. You set it to 360 if you're using this printer. The next step down is 270. This has to do with the printer head, and it works in multiples of 90. When would you use 270 is the question I hear. I'll tell you. You'd use 270 in two places. Let's say you're getting bronzing, okay, where you're dropping a little bit too much ink and it's now coming back and reflecting backward. Bronzing and gloss differential look the same, but they're caused by two different events. Bronzing is caused by dropping too much ink onto the paper. If you're bronzing an image, the quickest fix is to drop it down to the next resolution that the printer head wants to see, which in this case is 270. If you're using a matte fine art paper and it's not doing too well with 360 dots, you drop it down to 270, you put less ink down. There's an into the printer. There is an argument about smaller sizes using higher resolution file sizes. Again, that's speaker wire as far as I'm concerned. If you believe it, that's great. Okay, I find that for the best result, 360 DPI gives me the best result. Okay, well, here's the thing. Here's the other thing. All right, when the printer prints 2880, when you select that, the printer driver is interpolating it to 2880. Okay, so 2 times 360 is what? 2 times 720 is what? 2 times 1440 is what? Okay, do you see how there's all even doubles? There's no foul when you're interpolating if it's an even number double, 2, 4, 6, 8. When you get into 313%, that's where you get into trouble. So you're just pixel doubling. At the worst that's going to happen is the image will pick up a little softness because of interpolation artifacting. That's really easy to fix by tightening the image, and that's all handled by the driver. So give the printer driver what it wants to see. There is a discussion and arguments about over-resolution for smaller file sizes. There may be some validity to that. The other issue that you deal with is something called dot gain. Dot gain does you in. Dot gain is when the dot expands. If you're using a paper that has little hairs, fibers, it wicks, it will dot gain. This tends to be more with fiber-based papers than with alpha cellulose-based papers. So cotton fiber-based papers tend to have the potential for dot gain, which again is when you would go down to 270 dpi from 360. Cold pressed natural, hot pressed natural, cold pressed bright, hot pressed bright can handle a dot at 360. Somerset Velvet prefers to see a 270 file size. Different types of paper, different types of absorption, different types of dot gain. So yes, I'd explore looking at that and see if you agree or disagree with that argument, but from a I print a lot workflow, 360 PPI, I'm done. Epson is owned by Seiko Epson Corporation. Seiko has the tuning fork design for watches. The same tuning fork technology that they use for the watches is basically the same technology that they use for the printer driver head. So they can put 10,000 drops, theoretically, into the same spot, the exact same spot, because it's da-da-da-da-da-da. Other printers use a thermal approach, and what that is you heat the ink up to a point where it's hot enough that it spits. And that's somewhere around 595 degrees, my understanding. It will also fire at 590, and it will also fire at 605. So you have a huge range of where that dot will fire. You also pick up something called satellite dots, which is when the heated ink hits, it then splatters. The other problem is you can't coat it with a polymer. And because you can't coat it with the polymer, you can't boost the intensity of the ink like Epson can, which is why I go here. Here is where you set the printer resolution to 360 ppi, pixels per inch, which is different than DPI, dots per inch, because a pixel contains more information than a dot. A dot is a dot. Pixel has luminance and chrominance. So, set this here. I set my screen resolution to 100. And the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Here's the big one. Color settings. Command Shift or Control Shift K brings up color settings. This is the default North American General Purpose 2. We're going to select. Now here's the reason why you want to kind of settle on some papers. Remember we talked in the first class about the dreaded disease profilitis? This is just my laptop. These are all the papers that I have tested, have samples of. I'm still going. You notice that? Notice how it's still going. I have an acute case of profilitis. I'm still going, right? Oh, dare I say it, we hit the bottom. Okay, so yes, I have a lot of profiles. For this instance, what you want to do is select ProPhoto RGB. Why? Because it's a working color space and it is bigger than what I'm going to print out of, and all of the artifacting is going to happen, or much of the artifacting is going to happen outside of the gamut of what I'm going to print in, which minimizes my multiplication problems. Okay, now color management policies. Preserve embedded profiles. This is important. You select this, this, and this. And why you do that, and you check from time to time to make sure that that's still turned on, because sometimes updates will erase this. Why you do that is if you don't process in ProPhoto RGB and you think you are, if they're not turned on, you could go months having everything in sRGB. sRGB is the color space of the web. sRGB is the color space of printing with chemical-based, silver-based printers. sRGB is what you use if you're doing portrait social work and you're sending it to a Durst Lambda or something like that. It is not the color space of digital inkjet printing. sRGB. ProPhoto and Adobe RGB are the color spaces you want to work in. You want to print out of Adobe RGB, in my opinion, and you want to work in ProPhoto RGB 16-bit. This is important. You select ACE, Adobe Color Engine. You select as your rendering intent relative color metric. Relative color metric gives you the most amount of color, but it is the least forgiving of all of the color rendering intents. So if you set up your color management policies with relative color metric, that means that you're going to make decisions based off of what? Relative color metric. So you'll see the problems instead of having it be in perceptual, which compresses all of the colors into gamut. It is best to get into the habit of working in the best color spaces, the best rendering intent. Oh, here's the beauty of printing in black and white. It doesn't matter what color space you print out of. Why? Why? It's such a small gamut. I mean, it makes sRGB look like ProPhoto. Now, there are some characteristics that might occur. Well, are you using the advanced black and white mode?
No,
that's what I'm going to show you. I'll show you how to use it. For 100% of my black and white images, I use the advanced black and white driver. Okay? The reason why, yes, there are, if you print using a profile, not using the advanced black and white driver, you'll see some potential differences of slightly darkening or slightly lightening based on the peccadillos of the color space, and then you just know that and adjust to it. But the amount of what you're using in a black and white image when you're all done, or a chromatic grayscale image when you're all done, is such a small amount of color. Like I said, makes sRGB look like ProPhoto. Okay, this is utterly important. Black point compensation is on. The only time that you would turn it off is if you're building a profile in which doesn't have black point compensation in the raster image processor. Or I think, and I'm not sure, there's some applications of CMYK. But for what you're going to do, and that's just, I'm not clear on that, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that that's the other time you would do that. But for what we're talking about here, black point compensation should always be on. I'm trying to make your life easier. Do me a favor, all right? Here's the deal. 1 week, give me 1 week. Play my silly game for 1 week, and at the end of 1 week, either I'm full of fertilizer or I just made a flower grow. Okay? So my argument is either I'm full of fertilizer or it's from fertilizer flowers grow. So that, I think, is one of the best pieces of engineering to come along in printing, is black point compensation. Use dither, 8-bit dither channel images, compensate for scene references, profiles. This is the default for that, leave it there. But the most important one is make sure that black point compensation is on. Click. Yes.
When you say preserve embedded profiles, you have those. What does that mean? That means that there is a YCK profile in the file that you're importing. You want to preserve that and not change it, or you do want to change it? Oh, you're so cute.
I don't want. Sorry. You're not supposed to laugh at your own jokes. Okay. Why you want to select preserve embedded profiles is you can only go one direction when it comes to color spaces, downward. I start with ProPhoto, I go to Adobe RGB. Once I cut all that color out of the file, it's gone. I can't go, oh, I want to go back to ProPhoto. All I'm going to do is create a bigger bucket with the same amount of water. So once you create a color space, a file with a color space, you need to leave it in that color space. So if the file is sRGB, the file is sRGB. Putting it in a ProPhoto bucket is only at best going to make a bigger bucket. You may pick up something called rounding error, which causes all sorts of problems with the color. So you leave the color space whatever it's at that you've set it at, which is why you want preserve embedded profiles and you want ask when opening. So whenever Photoshop sees it, it tells you, like you saw the dialog come up where I have the printing file in Adobe RGB and it said profile mismatch. Embedded is Adobe RGB, working is ProPhoto. That tells me that my system is working. Okay, if I didn't have that on, I wouldn't know what I was in. It's just, at this point when it comes to printing a file, it is very important to know what's going on with the file. I send all my clients Adobe RGB. Okay, if they want to compress it down to sRGB, okay, fine. If I go to the web, it is going sRGB. And the reason why your printer is going is that you're printing silver or you're printing ink. sRGB is more geared towards producing a nice looking skin tone on a monitor. And so if you're using certain types of printers, it just makes things smaller and I wouldn't do it in my printing. If they request it, you got to give them what they want. I just don't understand why that would be a request. Okay, it most likely has to do with if it's a dye sublimation printer or if it's a Durst Lambda or a Poli, those printers are sRGB. Let's pretend I'm all done with everything I'm going to do, right? And I've now saved this as the TIFF that has the words underscore and in capital letters, final. And why it's in capital letters is, I can see it, okay? The convention is to do it in lowercase. I'm blind. Now, what you do at this point, this is the file that I'm going to print, correct? Okay, is you go to Edit, Convert to Profile. You go from ProPhoto RGB to Adobe RGB. Make sure that black point compensation is clicked. Make sure that relative color metric is selected. Use dither. If this had layers in it, not necessarily. It depends on what it is. Okay? If it's a printing file and you forgot to do the switch and you realize it and you've made corrections, you may want to keep those corrections. So do you want to flatten the file or do you want to make a decision later? This is grayed out now, so yes, I would do that, but I've saved a TIFF already. I'm going to convert it to this. This is where I'm making my final file. I'm going to convert that final file for printing to Adobe RGB, right? Actually, I should rephrase that. The final file is in ProPhoto. Why? In case I want to do something later. The printing file that I'm now going to repurpose, this is the question you're asking. I then convert to Adobe RGB. So I take the final file, convert it to Adobe RGB. I go, not yet, we're not there, okay? If I decide to go to 8-bit from 16-bit, you do profile, color space first, then bit depth second. You don't do the bit depth, then the color space. You convert in the higher bit depth, and if you're going to go to 8-bit for whatever reason, then you go from 16-bit to 8-bit. So color space to color space, bit depth to bit depth. That's how it works. At this point is where I would start doing the soft proofing. Okay, so this is, I take my file that I've saved, I'm going to convert it to Adobe RGB in my workflow, and then what I'm going to do is go to View, Proof Setup, joy of joys. And then I'm going to pick my profile. But let's take a look at which profiles you should consider using. This is important. Let's go to our 800 profiles. Or actually right here, P600. They're very similar in this. You see the numbers here where it says V3? Okay, anytime you see a profile from Epson that has a V3 or a V1 or a V2 versus ones like this one where it doesn't have anything, actually, do I have any that doesn't have anything? Where they don't have ones like here, where there's nothing here, use the one with the version number after it. This was done in the United States, and I know the guy who does it who is persnickety when it comes to color profiling. These are the better profiles to use, the one with the version numbers, where he's gone in and done specific adjustments to make sure that what you're getting is the best profile that he can make.
Would profile 2 be better than profile 1?
Yes, profile, all right, profile 2 will be better than profile 1, but you won't ever see 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that's his notation as to what iteration it is on what he's done profile-wise. Higher numbers are always better, okay? But if you see the version numbers after the profiles, those tend to be the better profiles, I think, in my printing opinion. Now, do custom profiles do a better job than generic profiles? Yes. But are the profiles that are being sent from Epson to you good? They're very good. Can you get a better print by profiling this using a Color Monkey or using an i1 or an ISIS? Yes, you can, because it's specific to the printer. Every printer has its own signature, but these are very good. And of the ones that you get, the ones with the version numbers give you the best result. The profile for a custom profile will produce a better result, period. Okay? These are not bad. They're acceptable, more than acceptable. You can always get a better result if you go more granular. Okay? So what I would do is do a test and see which one you like, but I would suspect that you would probably prefer the custom profile to your printer because it's specific to the peccadillos of your printer, whatever they may be. So you always get a better result if you custom profile. The profiles that Epson produces for you are more than acceptable. They're very well done profiles. And of the profiles that you get, the ones with the version numbers are better than the ones with the not version. Okay. But if you get one that doesn't have a version number and that's all it is, that is a very good profile. Okay. I want to be clear on that. That when you see the V's, that's the better of the two. That's the premium profiles that they make. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go to let's just for the sake of argument use one that that I've got right here. So we're going to take the P600 and I am going to just pick that and let us pick where are you? Let's pick cold press bright. Now do you see what happened when I did that? It all of a sudden got more matte. Now you can select simulate paper color, which is euphemistically referred to as the ugly button. So what you can do is I tend not to do that. This tells me what's going to happen to the picture. Now what I can do is I can come in and I can make adjustments based on this. And there's a whole series of techniques on how to do this. If you really want somebody that's really good at this, that shows you how to do this, John Paul Caponegro. He has a series Acme Educational puts out, which is the Fine Art Digital Printing, Fine Art Digital Proofing. And if you want to know more than you ever wanted to know about how to do this, that would be the way to go. But what you could do here, to give you an example, once we have soft proofed, let's click OK. You can come up here and let's say we decide that it needs a little bit more a hue shift or saturation boost. this is where you'd make those adjustments. This is where I would save it as a PSD. Okay? And it would be, I'd scale it, tweak it with the adjustments, and it would be the name of the file underscore 16 by 20, let's say it's a 16 by 20 underscore, and the paper type. So what do I know? How big it is, paper type, it's a PSD, means it has adjustments. I have 2 monitors in my studio, both produce Adobe RGB. One is a Wacom Cintiq, which I work on, okay, the Wacom Cintiq HD, which uses the NEC flat panel, okay, and then I use a BenQ monitor as my approval monitor. So I work on the monitor here and I'm using the approval monitor over here so that I'm working on the image and I'm looking at it. These are all calibrated, okay? So they're Adobe RGB. They're 99% plus, so the 100% Adobe RGB. Okay, that means that what I'm seeing if I'm in Adobe RGB, if I'm calibrated and I load the profile in, is close to dead on as I'm going to print, okay? If you're calibrated all the way across the board, then everything works. If you're not, you're only as good as your weakest link. My attitude is the weakest link should be you, not you, me. The weakest link should be the artist. That's the politer way. Now, Command or Control P brings up the print dialog box. You have 2 choices here. They are color handling. Printer manages color, Photoshop manages color. If it is a full spectrum color image versus a chromatic grayscale image or black and white, if it's a color image with colors like that, you let Photoshop manage the colors. Okay? You select whatever profile you're going to use of this mountain of profiles that I have. Okay, we're going to select for this SC100 Ultra Premium Luster Paper. Now here's an example. Do you see how there's no version number after this? But there's no other profile? I select this profile. If I had this profile but with a version number, I would select the one with the version number. Okay, so I'm going to select that profile. I am going to select black point compensation, and I'm going to select the orientation horizontal or landscape. Why? Because it is a horizontal image. Now that this is done, okay, I'd select the printer from my collection of printers. So whatever this printer is, and I'll show you how to load a printer in the Apple OS in a second. This is all selected, see that? Then I go to printer settings. I'm starting to build presets that I can set. So let's look at how to build a preset. I'm going to set this into default. The first thing I'm going to do, color matching. Check to see that this is grayed out. Okay? This is, once you do this once, for each paper, you're done. I'm going to go to printer settings. This case, it's going to be premium, ultra premium luster photo paper. It's going to be standard because it's going to come from here, the top thing here. I'm going to make sure that this is down. I'm going to select 2880 and I'm going to turn high speed off. Why I'm going to turn high speed off is high speed is unidirectional. Ink return, ink, return. High speed is ink, 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 ink. It produces a slightly finer image. It's noticeable, it's subtle, but it's noticeable. So what do I do if I'm making art? Okay, what's the best of you, right? The best of you is the print you leave behind. So now, once that's set, what I do here in advanced media control is I select wide for ultra premium luster and for exhibition fine art. Why I do that are there are these little wheels that move the paper through. And if you have a highly saturated black or a highly saturated color, you potentially can leave a slight mark in it if the ink is too deep. By selecting wider, that problem is completely negated. Now, once that's set, what I will do is save current settings as preset. Okay, so what printer is this? P800 2880 PLP. What do I know? Premium luster paper. Okay? So I know the printer, the resolution, the paper type. If I don't see ABW, I know that it is A. Okay? Now, once that's set and I go all printers, click OK. Hit save. Now, all of that's ready to print. Ma'am. My file resolution is 360 ppi. My printer resolution is 2880 dpi. Okay? The file size is 25% as a general rule of the printer resolution. Part of the reason for this is because a pixel contains more information than a dot. So you need multiple dots at different densities to replicate the amount of information that's in a pixel. Okay, 360, 2 times 360 is 720, 2 times 720 is 1440, 2 times 1440 is 2880. Even doubling. That's why. The file size is 360, the output resolution is 2880. Let's load a printer in the Apple OS. It's similar in the Windows OS as to where you go. You go to printers and scanners. Okay. You go to add. And what will happen is the pings will go out. And in this case, because it's a network printer, you see what I have here? Epson P800 series IP, and I want the Epson TCP IP, not the Bonjour. I'm going to click this, and I'm going to call this and I'm going to hit add. Okay, now do you see where it is? That's now added. Let's go back to Command P. See, it's right here. I'm going to select that. Photoshop manages colors. I'm going to select my premium luster paper like we did before, black point compensation. Let's scroll down here, center the file. Everything is exactly the way I want it to be. So now we have that. We're going to printer settings, paper size. I'm going to be printing 13 by 19, correct? There you go. That's now selected. I'm going to select my P800 2880 PLP setting that I made. Okay, let's watch. Note, everything is the way I set it. And maybe I did something I wasn't supposed to do. Yep, 1 second. There we go. Let's fix that. Note what I did.
Yes.
Okay. Save. Print. This is my print. Okay? 2.5 hours riding the train across the bridge, getting nasty looks from the conductors with my camera going click, 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 so that I could get the bridge and the V and the building and the Empire State to line up on that center line. I'm rather happy with myself. And I'm just rather happy with myself is all I have to say. That I did just for this demo. Just for this demo. Okay. So, this is probably the best print I have to show you what it is that you can do. So let me show you the outcome. I can get the printer driver to do that, which is give me all of the detail and give me all of the density that I have without going back to Photoshop. This is built into the printer driver, the ability to do this. The issue that has been addressed was that you couldn't see some of it based on how small the dialog box of the image in the printer driver was, which is, I'm going to show you in a second. Okay. What you have in the Epson printer driver with regard to black and white is basically, for all intents and purposes, a mini rip. So, Command P. Printer manages colors. Not Photoshop manages colors, because we're going to use the advanced black and white mode. Select printer settings. First thing that I'm going to do is go to color matching. This will be the default. I'm going to make sure that Epson color controls is selected. All right, because Epson is going to do the color mix. With me? Very, very important. Once that's done, printer settings. I have, let's pick my premium luster paper. Advanced, it'll default to AccuPhoto HD. I'm going to select advanced B and W photo. And I have my choice of neutral, which it defaults to cool, warm, and sepia. I like warm. Why I like warm has to do from my silver photography days. And to put this in perspective, I started photography when I was 7 years old, sold my first image when I was 9 years old, and have been a large format black and white photographer from about 9 until, well, let's just say that I was past my 20s. So I am by proclivity a black and white photographer. I'm going to select 2880, and then I'm going to go here. Now, it defaults to dark, which is what you want normally. Not normal, because normal is too light, and darker is too dark, but dark is just right. Okay, it's these controls. And the beauty of this is you can dial in your own tonality if you want. This is a default, but if I want to, watch what happens to this image as I move it around, right? Let's go back to, give me warm. Okay, so you can come in and make it whatever warmth you want. So you can have your own signature tone, just like you did in the silver days with how much you selenium toned it, at what dilution, with how much orbit bath you left sit into the paper to create the tonality that you want. You can do that with the driver. And that's the tool that you use to do it. You can also adjust the brightness, the contrast, the shadow tonality, which you can't see, and the highlight tonality, which you can see to some degree. Okay?
And how do you select what you want to affect?
Well, I'm going to show you, but not in this driver. Okay? And then maximum optical density, so you can affect that change too. Then there's this button here which is called high point shift, which the only time I've ever used it was to see what it did. And what high point shift is designed to do, and this might be of use if you have images with a large expanse of specular highlight, or a large, not large expanse, but a large area of very, very light that starts to go to paper white that gives you gloss differential, is if you have some image that's exhibiting that, which I have yet to find one of mine that does. What this is designed to do is it puts in the light black and fills in that area so that it evens it out. But I tell you this, it is not something that you will ever use, but it's nice that it's there on this rare occasion that I have yet to find that I'll ever need it. But that's what it does. Okay. That's how the controls work. You'd hit save, and we do the same setting like we've done here, where it would do all of those things. But let's go elsewhere.
So you put the borders in when you make the image.
Yeah, this is all. I make my canvas size exactly the way I want it, with the borders and all of that, so that I can sign it.
Yeah.
That's a workflow thing.
You use the borders as the borders. And you,
I add a border, but okay. Where was my question on color, Madame? Pretty, huh?
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's this one. This is the bee's knees. Alrighty. Let us, now bear in mind that what I'm showing you is beta software. So if it does something unpredictable, this is not ready for prime time yet, and it will be released sometime in the future. It's not available now. Okay? This applies to anything that Epson makes printer. We're going to launch Epson Print Layout. Okay. What's really nice is if I wanted to, I can load a whole bunch of images and it will put them down here. So if I'm going to do a mass printing, it will do that. Now I'm going to select my printer, and it will automatically chat with the printer. Ta-da. So now it's ready to give me everything that I want. Mm-hmm. Oops, that isn't what I wanted. Okay. This issue will be addressed by the time it comes out, where it will automatically size it. So what I just did, don't worry about. So you have the ability, should you decide to do this, you can scale it or bring it to its full size. It's already picked the quality. I can pick it to max quality, which is 2880. And then I have my choice of all my layout settings or my color settings. Printer manages color, yes. Dun, 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 dun. Printer manages color, advanced black and white mode. That look familiar? Wait. Okay. Warm. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shadow tonality and open up my shadows. I'm going to diminish the contrast, see what I can do here, and see what I'm doing. And I'm going to then lower the brightness and then boost my highlight tonality. See what I can do here? So highlight tonality is -8. Brightness is -1. Contrast -25. And highlight tonality is that. And you see what I just did? It's a little weird on this screen because of the nature of the monitor, but do you see how I can now see what it is that I'm doing with this? So that by being able to do this, I can come in and I can further fine-tune this image to exactly where I want it. Well, this is allowing you greater control of the advanced black and white mode. Okay? The advanced black and white mode, if you're using an Epson printer and you're not using it to print black and white, you're doing yourself a disservice. What makes my black and white images look the way they do is that 100% of them are printed using ABW. Okay? I may use other things to print other things because I do use RIPs for my work. The two that I tend to use are PrintDAO and Mirage. But when it comes to black and white, I use this, and the Epson printer driver does a very nice job of doing things.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.